Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, March 19th, 2025, and today we're going to talk about the neglected importance of shade, buying plant starts, and locating a greenhouse. So let's do it. All right, so if you're watching on YouTube, I am outside grafting, and usually I would cut all of these plants at once, but since I'm only doing like 60 plants, I'm not gonna do that. I'm just taking my time. So what I do is I try and cut as much. I want to leave as much as I possibly can right here, right, using this specialty knife. You see there's like it's kind of at an angle. Hi, kitty cat. Then I get a matching clip. You just get a range of these. I put it on perpendicular to the cut, because if you don't, it'll push out of the clip. And then I find a similarly sized scion plant. I cut it as long as I can based on the size. I want the cuts to match up. And so basically, like I said, put that on perpendicular, pop this right there on top, and then label it. So in this case, cherry bomb on Fortamino. All right, well, welcome to Wednesday, you all. Now that I'm saying that out loud, Wednesday would have been a good day to do the win segment. But anyway, I hope everyone is doing well. Yesterday, I obviously, as that clip showed, did some grafting, and they are healing away in the dark in the closet that houses our hot water heater and furnace. Super professional setup, obviously. They need a lot of darkness, plus 80-ish degrees and high humidity, so I place a humidity dome over top of the grafts after I graft them, and have to mist them several times a day, and they will stay there for about, 4 to 7 days, depending on how they look, before I start introducing them to more and more light. This is my third year in a row doing it, and so far so good. Anyway, speaking of darkness, this week I've been thinking about shade and the neglected role / importance of shade, not just in indigenous and traditional gardening, but just generally in ecosystems throughout history. Nailed that transition, I think. I started thinking about this after the Milpa / Three Sisters segment on Monday, and talking about trees and corn, and how one of the benefits of, if not reason for, planting taller plants like corn and sunflowers as well as trees in diverse cropping systems is shade. When I saw Daniel Mays of Frith Farm talk at the Oak Conference in January, he had mentioned how a nearby farmer friend of his refers to shade as a type of fertilizer. That's how important it has become, and indeed, certain crops at certain times of the year grow really well in and around shade. Ecologically speaking, when it comes to the natural state of almost all of the crops we grow, many are recovery species that grow on the edge of woods. Grasses like corn, which is a C4 plant, meaning they have a unique pathway for managing excessive heat, to oversimplify the heck out of it. Obviously, things like corn do fine in full sun, but most other plants evolved around and among taller plants and trees and shrubs. In other words, in some amount of shade. That is, of course, a blanket statement that it sidesteps a lot of nuance in terms of the unique diversity of locations where the crops we eat come from. But generally speaking, there was some shade involved, not just in their evolution and domestication, but in their production for many millennia. So let's talk about some of the things that small amounts of shade bring to the table. First, the obvious, shade is cooler than sunlight. I probably don't need facts behind that one, but it's true. Shade can drop the temperature by several degrees in both humid and dry climates, though in dry climates the effect is greater because humidity holds heat a little bit easier, and it is harder to cool off in humidity. Plants, therefore, especially those most affected by sunlight, get reprieve from the heat. It is also notably better as someone working in that sunlight to be in the shade of a tree. I remember there was nothing quite like stopping mid-cultivation in the summer during my first apprenticeship to eat a melon in the shade of the nearby poplar tree at the edge of the gardens. We always rushed up to the gardens in the morning to start work where the shade from the tree was still there in the summers. Getting back to the value of shade for plants, though, there is the diffusion of light, kind of like the shattering, the splitting, the separating of light, meaning that in the shade, light is not just coming down in one intense beam, but gets scattered as it hits plastic or tree leaves or whatever. I mean, ask any professional grower who owns a high tunnel if things grow better and more readily in their open fields or in their tunnel, and if they say in the open, I would be surprised. In terms of just happy, healthy plants, I'm going to guess 9 out of 10 professional growers say that the best plants they grow in the peak of summer come out of their high tunnels and shade houses. This is why you see a lot of those growers moving towards almost exclusively growing under plastic. The plastic from the tunnel provides a small amount of shade, usually 10 or 20%, which eliminates some of the stress on the plant while also diffusing that light. And when light gets diffused or split up, it's better able to reach all parts of the plant that can photosynthesize, which is more of the plant than just the top. Meaning that if the light is just pouring straight down on a lettuce head, all the lower leaves are missing out on their chance to maximize the photosynthetic process. But if the light is diffused and comes at the plant from every angle, then more of the plant can photosynthesize, which could increase growth and overall crop health. Trees do this. They diffuse the light. Plastic does this. Taller plants do this. Buildings do this to some extent, and so on. Light bounces off pretty much everything. Think about it this way. It's not pitch black in the shade, right? That's because light is bouncing in, scattered by everything above it, and creeping through cracks between the leaves, spread out across the sky. Shade also helps retain soil moisture, which plants and microbes appreciate. Shade reduces soil and ground level temperatures, which is important because many of our crops, like summer lettuce, for instance, will straight up stop photosynthesizing if they get too hot. Of course, there's absolutely such a thing as too much shade, which will slow growth, create elongated, leggy plants, and reduce the yield of fruiting plants. So it's got to be used, well, a bit like a fertilizer. A little bit goes a long way. And too much can be a problem. A small amount of shade, either artificial, controlled, or planted, can provide a lot of benefits, especially in hotter climates or perhaps even in high altitude climates where the sun is incredibly intense, like in the mountains. Like I said in an episode last week, I prefer full sun, and to control the shade I add for picking a garden site, but I also definitely do like to add that shade where possible. And with more trees on the way to our farm, literally right now, more shade is en route. Just going to take a few years to grow it. All right. Thoughts on shade? Let me know for Feedback Friday, and we'll take a quick break. When we come back, locating a greenhouse in the shade, confoundingly, maybe not so much. BRB.
Before you, there was no sun. The light came only from the moon.
Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil is a worker-owned co-op making living soils in Cleveland, Ohio using NOP-compliant food scrap compost. They wrote us, quote, "We're stoked to support Growers Daily because healthier, tastier, and generally more decent food systems start with growers like all of you, inquiring minds who care about the land." End quote. Love the folks over there at Tilth. If you're looking for top-notch compost or potting mix, drop an email to the folks at Tilth via info@tilthsoil.com. That's info@tilthsoil.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by So Right Seeds. So Right Seeds is an heirloom seed company that offers fresh, high-quality, open-pollinated seeds. They have a great selection on their website of over 400 varieties, along with a planter's library with tips for growing. They offer cover crops and bulk packs of seed for sustainable home gardening. The instructions on the back of their packets have all the information you need to get started. Go to So Right Seeds, that's SOW, and use my discount code NOTIL for 15% off your order. That's SoRightSeeds.com. All right, enjoy the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Papa John Misty, love that name, who writes, quote, "Hey Jesse, I'm starting a farm with my wife. I've been farming for a couple of years and I'm excited to get started on my own. One of the biggest challenges has been getting the infrastructure for the farm up and running, i.e. digging a well, getting power to the well, etc. One of the things that we have been wondering is about the location of the greenhouse. We have a spot in mind, but wanted to see what factors you would think are important when setting up the greenhouse. The spot we are considering will need an electrical service added, but will be right next to our well, so we already have the need to get power to that location. It is on the north side of our property and gets quite a lot of sun, but also some wind. We have another option closer to our house, but gets a bit less sun and will need to draw electric and water from our house, which is possible, but not ideal. Anyway, I love your show so much. It's really a phenomenal resource for someone starting out a new farm like me." End quote. Awesome. Thank you for the kind words about the show and the fun question. Okay, so I'm assuming here that you mean greenhouse in the technical sense that most growers would use that term. That is to say, referring to a propagation house for plant starts and such, and not a place for much of or potentially any in-ground production. That does change my answer to this a little bit, because a high tunnel, which is where production usually takes place as opposed to a seedling propagation house, can be located slightly further away from the house, generally speaking, than a greenhouse. A greenhouse is, unless you fully automate it, a place you will be visiting multiple times a day. So it's proximity to your house is not just a practical thing, but can become a financial challenge. In other words, if you are having to spend multiple minutes every day just walking to and from the greenhouse, that can eat up a lot of time. Not to mention that if your fields are also far away from that space, more time will be eaten up transporting the transplants from the location to your fields. However, I will say that your situation has the unique challenge of the potential site that is close to the house, close to the house being where I would recommend generally placing a greenhouse, does not get as much sunlight, and sounds like it will be more challenging to install electricity because you'll be installing it out to the well and there, or at least doubling the cost for you. And I'm just going to speak generally here. So for me, here's what I believe are important in some relative order, but obviously you rarely get everything you want in farming. So first, the water, which you've already mentioned, but water access is essential in an ag greenhouse or high tunnel. If you're going to cut it off from the weather, whatever you're growing, you have to be able to water it. Electricity is mildly important, but that depends on the goals and crops. Like if you are not trying to push the seasons too hard, you can get away with not having any electricity in your greenhouse. We did that for years, proximity, and it worked fine. I mean, I farmed without electricity for almost as long as I've been farming with electricity, so either works. You just have to get a little creative. Proximity to the house, that's an important one for me. I will visit the greenhouse every single day of the growing season, every one of them, even my days off. I will not necessarily visit the fields every day. So the amount of space between my home and the greenhouse, or if I did not live on the site, I would want the greenhouse close to wherever I was parking. That is really critical for me. Sure, it's nice to walk through the gardens to get to your greenhouse and check and see how things are going. But also when you're in a hurry or it's raining or blistering hot or whatever, it's nice to just get out there, bust it out, and move on. Now, wind. You know how I feel about the wind. Obviously, you probably do not want to put a greenhouse at the top of a ridge with absolutely no wind protection. Or if you do, you really, really want to stabilize it and get those posts deep into the soil so it will hold on to it. So if wind will be a factor at all, the greenhouse structure itself should account for all of that. Wind bracing, trusses, all of it. As for shade for a greenhouse location, that's probably creeping into the too much shade category that we kind of just talked about, though in certain areas or for certain structures, people will throw shade cloth over their greenhouses anyway. So it's not bonkers to think a little shade in the summer might be a welcome thing. We open the ends up entirely of our greenhouse just to allow for really great airflow and for it to not get too hot in the summertime. A little shade might be okay in that situation. Just depends on how much shade we're talking about here and what time of year. In the worst case scenario, especially if you have access to electricity, grow lights can help supplement natural light. And in fact, some growers use grow lights like that anyway in the late winter just to kind of move things along. Also, another factor that some folks may need to think about is if you plan to sell plant starts out of it and have customers come in, that may determine not just placement, but construction, because some municipalities will require certain building permits if you're going to have people there, and you may need specific insurance for structures that allow visitors, like a greenhouse where you're trying to sell plants out of it. So anyway, I don't know if that helped or complicated your decision any, but I do hope it added some insight into how I might make that call. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there for now, and I await your all's thoughts on greenhouse placement. But up next, we're going to talk about how to buy plant starts in case you don't want to grow them yourself. Yeah, be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Harnois Greenhouses. Harnois Greenhouses has pioneered controlled environment agriculture since 1965, partnering with market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver turnkey greenhouse solutions. Their unwavering mission is to support growers' success through innovation and expertise in design, manufacturing, and installation. Harnois Greenhouses are engineered to withstand high wind and snow loads, providing optimal brightness, increased yields, rapid ROI, and long-lasting durability. With over 20,000 projects completed, they are more than a manufacturer. They are a trusted partner. Their structures foster sustainable, energy-efficient ecosystems that drive profitable, resilient agriculture. In 2025, Harnois is introducing a new low-tech, high-tunnel model starting at just $2 per square foot, offering open field growers an accessible entry into controlled environment agriculture. Learn more at harnois.com. That's HARNOIS.com. All right, back to the show. All right, so having just discussed where to put a propagation house, it should also be said that not everyone can or necessarily should grow their own plant starts. However, everyone who is buying plant starts should have a good idea of how to go about it in a way that is not just bringing in pests and diseases or plants that aren't going to perform well for you. First off, just in case this seems like a solely small scale or backyard subject, not all commercial growers grow their own plant starts. I have known many growers who relied on nurseries to do some of their plant starts and sometimes most of their transplants, especially in the early years. Some growers rely on nurseries to do the semi-complicated stuff like grafting tomatoes or for the more complicated flower crops that need stratification. In fact, if the difficulty of a certain crop in your area is the reason you're not growing something, perhaps a plant nursery is the ticket. Or conversely, if you really like growing plants, plant starts, and are good with spreadsheets, perhaps a nursery business is in your future or is your business. Anyway, there are some do's and don'ts when it comes to buying plants that are important to consider. For one, buy from a reputable farm or nursery. Farmers are usually producing their own plant starts along with your plant starts and are doing their own quality control. So especially if you like their produce in the summer, it wouldn't hurt to check out their plants in the spring. The other benefit of them growing and selling their plants is that they may only be selling the varieties that they like to grow, which would mean that, at least potentially, they have experience growing those crops in your climate. They also will be able to advise you on what they have for what you're looking for. That same thing goes for a good plant nursery for the most part. They may only grow what's popular and what people are asking for, which isn't always what makes sense, what makes the most sense in a specific region. But they should have someone on staff who could advise you for what you're looking for. Some nurseries will also just produce what you ask them to. Like you can ask for certain seeds grown a certain way and ready at a certain time from some nurseries, which is awesome. If you are certified organic, you have to follow the guidelines for buying plant starts, which the easiest, safest way to do that is to buy certified organic plant starts. If you can't get certified ones, you will have to prove that any mix used and any amendments used are themselves compliant with NOP standards. But anyway, there may be nurseries who will produce exactly the plants you need organically, if they're allowed to. It won't be as cheap as buying seeds, but when you factor in labor and infrastructure and soil mix and all the expenses that go into producing, not to mention just the savoir-faire of producing plants, the price is generally not all that crazy from a commercial nursery. Buying from most box stores is kind of a hard pass for me, even if they sell certified organic plant starts. With no one guaranteed to be doing any sort of quality control, the risk is high of some amount of pest or disease or maybe even contamination. Just too many horror stories there. Anyway, no matter where you are buying from, here are some basic physical things to consider. One, taller is not always better. Sometimes a tall plant can mean an older plant that has been maintained in a small pot for several weeks. A small plant, in particular tomatoes or peppers, may have less risk or disease and less root wrapping, called being root bound. Two, a flowering or fruiting transplant is a stressed transplant. If the seedling is flowering, it generally means it is not happy and it's just trying to create some fruit, some progeny, before it dies. It does not mean you will get to production faster. And in fact, if you buy a plant like that, pull the fruit off at planting so it will put its energy into establishing its roots. 3, avoid plants with yellow leaves or brown spots. You don't have to know every disease in the world to buy a transplant. You just have to know that most diseases leave some sort of mark. So if the leaves are yellow or brown, or if they've got like any sort of wilt or spots, stay away from them. They should be nice and stubby and green and healthy looking. Check the growth center right at the top and underneath of the leaves to see if there are any aphids there. If so, don't grow. Well, that's not strictly true. If your plant starts to get aphids or have aphids, you can manually deal with them and then plant them. And if planted into decent soil conditions, it should outrun the aphids, but it's not ideal, obviously, to purchase them with the pest already there. 5, avoid the blue fertilizer balls in the soil mix. If the soil mix looks funky and colorful, that's not a great sign. And it's not anything you want in your soil. The white ones are perlite. That is generally fine. The blue ones, not so great. All right, what would you all add to this list? Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there for now. Don't forget, we are officially a 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Enormous thank you to all of our sponsors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No Till Growers. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. I hope I picked a good one. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook by me or The Seed Farmer by Dan Brisebois over at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or sign up in the month of March, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Richard Schuler. So this is the story of a journalist, Richard, who is picking up, there's this like trend going around on TikTok. And it's basically these people they'll buy these plants, this very specific glowing plant that has been propagated by this group of the botanists. And anyway, they buy this plant. And all the TikToks are very boring, but it's just a person sitting next to a plant looking very relaxed. So anyway, Richard is thinking, well, this seems like there's got to be a story here. This seems weird. It's like there's something weird about this plant. Can't quite put a finger on it. So he starts his reporting, and things get interesting. All right, thanks for watching and/or listening. We will see you tomorrow